Please call the roll.
Representative Crago. Representative Jennings. Representative Nyman.
Here.
Representative Oakley.
She was here just 5 seconds ago. Excused.
Representative Olson. Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Here.
Representative Stivar.
Excused.
Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Washut. Representative Western. Representative Yen.
Here.
Representative Zwaniter. Chairman Summers.
Here.
Representative Oakley.
All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of keep Matt like right along here. There's, let's get Representative Stivar called in there.
Representative Stivar.
So kind of how I'm gonna handle this is I'm gonna accept a motion if somebody wants to move the amendments that are in this and the whole thing, and then we'll go through and we'll alter that. And I think I'll keep Matt here for questions, and we'll be a little informal in that manner. So if we have questions on a certain section, and then if it's moved and seconded, I'll go page by page, and we'll see if there's anybody wants to bring any amendments to any page. And then at the end, we'll vote on its entirety. And that will be our recommendation to the Joint Rules Committee only. And then Joint Rules will take it up to decide what we want to do with, what the Joint Rules wants to do with it, if anything. So with that, would anybody, I don't see any audience or anything, so I'm just gonna assume no public comment. Please.
I move the amendment to the Wyoming Manual Legislative Procedures.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. So let's walk through page by page. So we'll start with Romanette I, the first page. Are there any proposed changes to that?
Cover, Mr. Speaker, I would
Yep.
propose a change. Mr.
Okay.
Speaker, I would move that we would strike periodically and replace it with at least every 4 years, if I may, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman.
Been moved and seconded? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think that that's probably some of the situation that we are dealing with right now, is because periodically means that we could do it once every 15 years or whatever. Who knows what periodically means? So I think we really should endeavor to be more aggressive and more consistent about how we update this. In so doing, I think we can avoid a lot of the issues that we've dealt with on just such a large amount of information having to be adopted at one time and digested. So I think we have a responsibility to look at this document, to update it at least every 4 years, and then keep it more current.
Is there any other comments or discussion? You know, I think it's good to have a goal. You know, I guess periodically is periodically, so I'm certainly to have no problem with this amendment at all. All right, having seen no other discussion, all those in favor of that amendment, Barry, do you have, or Representative Crago, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not necessarily opposed to putting the 4-year requirement on there. I'm not sure it's needed. And the reason I say that is I don't know if it's necessarily up to LSO to go. I mean, what are they looking for every 4 years? I guess is kind of the question. I mean, yeah, they can read through it, and I'm just not sure what kind of requirement we're putting on our attorneys in our office, because, and granted, I'm still a newbie. You know, I haven't been here very long, so I don't necessarily know. And maybe one of the longer serving members can tell us what exactly are they going to be looking for? Yeah, so they just sat here, and what's that mean? They read through it. I'm not opposed to the deadline. I guess I just need to know a little bit more. What does review? That's a pretty vague term. So what's that encompass?
Representative Zwanitzer, I see you go, and then I'll go with Representative Nyman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And there were a couple of terms I would go fight with our LSO bullpen on, why do we do this? Well, it's in the manual, and well, how do I fix the manual? Well, it's more of a collection of procedures. But I do understand, and maybe I can ask Mr. Obrecht, don't generally, I think LSO kind of cursory goes to the manual every year, because every time I had a complaint, I would get an email from Dave or Ian or Matt on, well, quit rocking the boat. And so, isn't there generally kind of a cursory review all the time, every year, of the manual of legislative procedures to make sure everything's working internally?
Director Obrecht?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know, that's probably not, doesn't happen every year. Yeah. Here's what would happen. If we changed our procedure and it needed to change, we would update that in the manual, give it to Management Council for consideration, and then onto the bodies for adoption.
Please.
And of course, Management Council could take this up whenever they wanted and review it, or any member could take it to council to do that.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to remind everyone, we do have a Committee on Legislative Facilities, Technology, and Process, which arguably would be a great place to have this as kind of a yearly action at their meetings, as they review other things related to legislative process in the legislature, if it was this committee's desire.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only thing I would say is, and I appreciate that from the good representative to my right, but I guess my thought is in this, is if we were a little bit, more structured and knowing that if we've got some historic practice or something like that, it just puts the impetus on us to make sure that we're getting those things in the manual so that we don't see such a large amount of changes in all in one time. And granted, there's certainly no restriction being able to fix things every year, but just have us kind of a line out there that says we need to be looking at this thing good at least once every 4 years, making adjustments if necessary.
Representative Yin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if you look at the other blue language that's struck out and the new language, you can see that the last time that the manual has been updated is 2008. So even though we had that at least every 4 years, and so I was on the subcommittee that reviewed it, even though we had that language there, it still hadn't been reviewed in 15 years. So if we want it actually to be reviewed, I would suggest a different committee than Management Council, or just make sure that, many of us here are on Management Council, just make sure that we do it in 4 years from now, or remind our antecessors to do it.
Chairman Washit?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All I think this means is that we put it on the calendar, and that every 4 years there's a formal reminder from LSO to Management Council saying, it's been 4 years, is there anything you want us to change?
Anybody else? Question having been called, all those in favor of removing periodically and going back to at least every 4 years signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. So let's go on. Anything else on this page? All right, we're going to go into the index now. Into the index, yes. Let's go past the index just for the, if we eliminate something, we can do some conforming language in the index, right? So now let's go to page 1 and part 1, and this was some of the, and number 1 in the new red language where it says that this is by a majority vote of the elected members. And so this was some of the discussion before, and so I guess, does anybody have any recommended changes or amendments to this page?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I'd be happy to move an amendment just for some discussion.
We don't have to have any if you don't want them, but if you would really like to, we can.
Okay, no, I'm good then.
All right. No, I don't want to discourage you if you found something that needs fixed. Okay. All right, page 2. Just a second, I gotta fold this so I can get there. Any changes on page 2? Matt, as we go along, if you see something that's like, really you ought to look at this, just heads up, So
Mr. Chairman, I've gone over this manual multiple times with almost everyone in this room, so I'm not going to offer anything unless somebody asks me.
Gotcha.
All right.
Perfect. Page 2. Let's go to page 3. Please, Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 3, under section 7, standing committee actions on bills. I move that we keep where it's striked. Oh, wait a minute.
Reinsert the stricken language.
Yep, sorry, I was confused on the wrong page here. Yes, most members serve on more than one committee, and I'd be happy to explain.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that we reinsert the stricken language on number 7. Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think this is a great opportunity for this committee to clear up any unwritten rules, so to say, for new members as they come into the body, as they're elected into the body. And the reason being is there's this notion out there that, and actually there's some accusations of discrimination based on political beliefs that not all are assigned to 2 committees. And so I think this is a great opportunity to clear that up and to provide some transparency for new members on what exactly is allowed and not allowed.
And I guess I asked Matt this once. I mean, when did this version, the subcommittee didn't do this. This was prior to the original copy, right? And do you have some
Mr.
knowledge of why this was brought in?
Sure, and maybe just for everybody here, before we get too far into this, so in 2020, we were like, hey, we need to update the manual. And that's when former director Dave Groover was still working for LSO. And so I knew he would have the capacity to do it following the 21 session. So Dave, in spring of 21, made the majority of these additions and deletions to the manual. And then throughout 2021, myself, LSO legal, LSO budget fiscal, and the chief clerks made further changes to it. And then it was presented to Management Council in January of 2022. Management Council, it was a long day. They didn't want to take it on that day, so they created that subcommittee to study it during 2022. This change was in the first version that Dave gave me, that he struck, most members serve on more than one committee. And I don't remember any other discussion surrounding it than that.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I prefer it being left out because it seems to me that it's unnecessary at best and possibly confusing and some of the, to use the good representative's words, to say what's allowed and not allowed, but it doesn't say what's allowed and not allowed. And for example, I mean, I only served on one committee my first term. I mean, does that mean I'm lesser than? Because I mean, most of them serve on more than one. If it's not the way it is, I don't think it's necessary. So, against the amendment and for keeping that language stricken.
Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had this conversation. In the past, chairman didn't get 2 committees. This all started my second year in. All right, when I first was elected, when the whip and floor majority leader, not floor majority leader, Speaker Pro Tem got chairmanships. All right, in the past, it's always been leadership didn't get committees. Chairmans didn't get 2 committees. The tradition was chairman didn't get 2 committees. Leadership, the only one on leadership that was actually assigned a committee was the whip, which opened up more opportunities for other legislators, the younger ones, to get 2 committees. There was a few, with the way the numbers in the committees work, there was 1 or 2 freshman legislators that got 1. I believe this needs to stay in, and we need to go back to that tradition. I mean, we're all duly elected. You know, we've had this conversation, you know, and the experience part doesn't fly with me, sir. So, on and for the amendment.
So, just a couple of comments. Well, one comment is, I know when I was both majority whip and speaker pro tem, I was assigned to a committee. In fact, I was assigned to a committee all 4. I don't know what the history went back before my time, but certainly the majority whip and the speaker pro tem, when I first came in, were both assigned to committees. So, yeah. Representative Crago, and then I'll go to Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple things, just from a legal perspective, that language that the amendment is requesting be kept in really doesn't provide the standard we're looking for. I mean, I don't think that, I mean, if we want to set sideboards, then let's set sideboards, but that doesn't do it, in my opinion. I mean, to say most members serve on more than one committee, I mean, is that 50% plus 1? I mean, I just don't think that gets us where we want to go. And then also to echo what Representative Oakley said is, I mean, if we remember back 2 years ago in our class, and Representative Rodriguez-Williams was in that class too, most of us only had 1 committee. I think there was only 2 of our class that had more than 1 committee. And it worked out fine. You know, the 3 of us were lucky enough to get on the committee we all wanted, and it worked out fine. And I think most everybody else was too. I just don't know if that sets a precedent because, for example, this next year, depending on what happens with reelections and whatnot, we still have a lot of people that are just rolling into their second term. Judiciary, for example, that committee is a heavy load. And I thought we had plenty of work just with 1 committee, you know, and as freshmen, that was a really heavy load. And so to say, oh, let's put the people that are on judiciary still on more than 1 committee, even if they're freshmen, it doesn't matter. Let's not worry about that. I can tell you, we would not have been as effective as a committee, just saying, my opinion, if us freshmen, and there was quite a few of us on that committee, we weren't the only 3, there was a couple others. If we'd have been stuck on another committee, I just don't think the work product that we produced out of that committee would have been as good for the state of Wyoming. So for 2 reasons, I'm against the amendment. 1, I don't think it gets us where we want to go. If we want to create sideboards, then let's actually put more language in there to do that. 2, I don't know if the effect of it's good for the state of Wyoming.
Representative Olson, and then Representative Zwanitzer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to belabor the point, but I think the reason I favor striking the language, it's pretty much been said, but I think as we all discuss it more, what our perspective is, I think what we see is that there is no normal here. It varies from year to year. If you serve on appropriations or judiciary, you serve on 1 committee. In fact, in my 6 years, I've only ever served on 1 committee every term. I'm one of the few chairmen who doesn't have a second committee this term. I believe John Eklund doesn't have a second committee either. And I served a term with a majority floor leader who doesn't serve on a committee, and I served a term with a majority floor leader who did serve on a committee. I mean, it's across the board, so I just don't think there is a normal, which is why I favor it being stricken, because there is no normal. But I also think Representative Crago really said it best. If you really wanted to make some type of an actual rule, if you will, out of this, it needs to actually tell us what the rule is and be more prescriptive or more precise in what it does. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Zwanitzer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would just say that actually, according to the rules, each body gets to set how many standing committees there are. And in my early years, my first 4 terms, we actually played around with how many members were on certain committees. That's why you have 13 right now in Rules and Procedure. We've kept that for about 10 years. So I just like the deletion because then each chamber can decide they only want 6 standing committees this year, or they want 18, but I think because it's in each chamber's specific responsibility to decide that, it's probably better not to, have it in the legislative manual.
Anybody else like to comment on this? Not, all those in favor of striking, of unstriking the strikeout on 7, so bringing back in most members serve on more than one committee. All those in favor of bringing that back signify by saying aye. All those opposed? No. Motion fails. Anything else on page 3? Anything on page 4? Anything on page 5? 4?
Mr. Speaker, I just had a question.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
I don't want to waste too much time, but in the past, has the practice been that someone who was not a committee chairman could draft a substitute bill? Has that been the practice? I just don't recall how it worked in the past.
Director.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, good question. In the past, it'd taken the whole committee action to request a substitute bill. So a committee would actually have to vote in the affirmative that their amendment was so extensive that they needed a substitute bill. This is just to clarify that the chairman can request that on his own prerogative without committee action. Now, the committee can still request a substitute bill as well. But what we got a lot of is a chairman coming in and saying, hey, we're really considering extensive amendments to House Bill 10. To visualize it, my committee really needs a substitute bill.
Any other questions or comments on 4? Let's go to page 5. Is there anything on page 5? Page 6. Anything on page 6? Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Please, Chairman Washit, page 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems that most of our Rules Committee work on the floor involves the question of germaneness. And I just wonder if maybe we could state, because I had a position on a germaneness thing, and I said, Roger, somebody else read out of Mason's, which suggested that germaneness should be interpreted more broadly. And then other members indicated germaneness has historically been considered in a much more narrow context. I don't have the exact verbiage here, but I'm just wondering if maybe we want to pick one standard for what germaneness means in the House of Representatives.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, it's a really good question. So your rule says each amendment has to be germane to the bill. And then you cite to Mason Section 402. And Mason Section 402 explains what is germane. I think a lot of the time when the House is taking up a germaneness question, what it's really asking is if the amendment is changing the bill beyond its original purpose or adding another subject to the bill, not whether it's germane. An amendment's germane simply if it reasonably relates to the topic of the bill. So you could actually have a germane amendment that unconstitutionally changes a bill beyond its original purpose or adds another subject. That's why I think this provision in the manual is so important. It clarifies that the House, by historic practice, and the Senate by rule now, have stated that the question of whether an amendment changes a bill unconstitutionally is appropriate for the chair to rule on and then the full body to a point of order, and not just by its vote on the amendment.
And probably that last one we did on the floor, I did incorrectly, because I went in and had that afterwards, had that conversation with Matt. And probably, well, not probably, I think Representative Western's reading of Mason's was accurate, and it was more an issue of whether it was beyond the title or more than one title. And that was the question, probably more of a constitutional question than it was a germaneness question. Chairman Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So when someone raises a point, can we examine, so they claim a point on germaneness, can we examine it more broadly than that, than just the point that was made on the floor? Or are we restricted to make our ruling as the Rules Committee on that particular point?
Director, I think we'd have to be rule on that point. And then if the Rules Committee goes, well, you know, maybe this is the other, then the guy would go to the mic and say, point of order, I think I should have said constitutionality, but I'll let the director speak to that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Wash, that's exactly how I'd handle it. If the point of order is made on germaneness, the Rules Committee and the chair should ultimately rule on the question of germaneness. If the Rule Committee says, well, it's not germane, but you know, we wonder about constitutional, then that member or another member is free to bring up that question, that point of order.
Representative Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for my edification, because I'm a little bit confused about this, is constitutionality actually, or unconstitutionality, is that a proper point of order? Isn't that more left to the vote of the body upon the amendment, not necessarily a point of order that can be ruled upon by the Rules Committee?
Director.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Crago, historically and under Mason's, yes. But that's why the House has strayed from that for many years now and has ruled on the constitutionality on a point of order and not just on the ultimate vote on the main question. And that's why this provision was placed in the manual to clarify that historic practice. And of course, the Senate now has put in their rules that an amendment must not change a bill beyond its original purpose or add another subject in violation of the Constitution. And the House, I think, considered that a little bit this year. And that's, of course, always on the table too.
Okay. Any other questions on page 9? Page 10. Page 11. 10?
11.
Please.
And Director Obrecht, it's probably just a question there in 18, when it comes to this 3-day window the governor has. And it comes because I've been here past midnight enough times in my tenure that that's not a hard rule. It's just in legislative procedures. So if we were here on third reading of the budget up until 12:10 in the morning, just because it's in rules, we wouldn't truly have to wait till at 12:01 the next day. Where does that come from, just historical practice versus if the legislature was to demand that 3 days means 3 days? If you could just go a little bit into that background.
Director?
Mr. Chairman, just so I understand the question, you're talking about the time the governor has while you're in session to get you back any veto he's got on an enrolled act. So the clock starts, his 3-day clock, and this is pursuant to an attorney general opinion, is if we get it to him before midnight, he'll have 3 legislative days till 11:59 on that third legislative day after the day we give it to him on to return it to us.
Representative
So,
Swanson.
Mr. Chairman, because we have never contested that AG opinion, if we just fall in line with it, I guess is my question.
Director.
Is there any worry that we can't override the manual legislative procedures should the need arise that doesn't keep the entire legislature in session another day?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I mean, constitutionally, he's got 3 days. So, and I feel like, honestly, that AG opinion is beneficial to both the legislative branch and the executive branch.
All right. Any other questions on page 11? Page 12. Looks like 13. Anything on 14? Anything on 15? 16? 17? 18. Then we go into the appendix. Appendix A, A1, A2, when we hit that piece where we kind of set how the chairman could do things and not do things that really hadn't been established. I forget now where it was at, but when we get to that place.
The absentee
remind
voting.
me, please, thank you. B1, B2, B3, C1, D1,
Mr. Speaker,
please.
I have a question. This is a clerical issue. On
Which
number,
page?
page D1, under item 3, the new language in red refers to an enrolled copy, and that didn't appear to be an English word, so I wanted to find out if that's a typo.
Director, that's a term of art.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, I think Dan Pauly's been credited with actually coining that term. I don't know if that's true or not, and actually he told me he didn't, but I think he may have. When we use the term enrolling, what we mean is a bill that is passed the second house with amendments, we actually manually cut and paste those amendments into the bill, or now we've, I guess, gotten sophisticated enough where we can do it on a PDF, but we're afraid about the messing up the page numbering when we do that. But we create those, we always create those, that enrolled version for the conference committee to be able to visualize where the amendments go and what effect they have. So that's what it is.
Particularly on a really complicated, big deal bill, but not on every bill, probably.
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, we'll do it on almost every enrolled bill. For one thing, we want to make sure that JCC, when it comes out, is right. And that's one way, that's a tool for the attorneys to make sure that the conference committee reports correct.
Anything else on D1?
I have one question on that, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So in our history, we have enrolled bills on like second reading. I think in eminent domain had 16 amendments, and it was so out there that we actually had to delay another day to put those in. So where does that come in? Is it request by a chairman or the body? Because I know sometimes LSOs push back and say it takes a lot of time and effort, and you've nicely said, please don't make us do this, but where is that threshold of who can ask for an enrolled version before JCC, just when we have so many amendments on like a committee of the whole bill that it fundamentally alters everybody's understanding at that point?
And Director, I've had the same pushback over the years at times, trying to get an enrolled copy.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that is probably one of those historic, I mean, we can't do it for every bill. And so, the attorneys need to make a judgment call there too on whether the amendments are so complicated that the House won't be able to consider it without the enrolling. Usually if the presiding officer requests it, we'll do it, but we've done it without the need for the presiding officer too. If time is especially of the essence, we'll do it for the body to be able to consider as well. We did it, I think, for every bill during the last couple special sessions. So that people could see that.
All right, thank you. D2, E1, E2, E3, F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, F6, H1, H2, H3, I1, J1, J2, K1, K2, K3, K4, K5, K6, K7. Chairman, want to do that? L1. And then M, and this is where you put some in another place and struck, so director, starting on M1, just a reminder.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, we removed the sample interim committee rules from the manual because they're recited verbatim within the joint rules, attached to the joint rules. Mr. Chairman, here's where your proxy and absentee voting changes is on M3.
Okay, right here.
Right.
on M3.
Yep. And so, Mr. Chairman, the first paragraph on M3 is the interpretation of joint rules adopted by the House and Senate that don't match. And we'll have to expand on that interpretation if you don't act on Joint Rule 22-1 this year, which is also the other agenda item, I think, today. Right. Paragraph 2 is clarifying, and this term has been used incorrectly in the Wyoming legislature for as long as I've been associated with it. I've used it incorrectly. I mean, it's not everybody has. And proxy voting is actually where, in some legislative bodies, where Representative Western can give Representative Rodriguez-Williams his vote, but he doesn't tell her how to vote. She just gets 2 votes to vote for Representative Western in committee or on the floor. That's never been the practice in the Wyoming legislature, but what we do allow is absentee voting, where a member will leave an absentee ballot with the chairman or another member, and the chairman decides whether to accept that. This creates a uniform provision on absentee voting in joint interim committees, and requires that the chairman announce the standard at the first regularly scheduled meeting of the committee, apply the same standard throughout the biennium. If the chairman failed to announce the standard at the first meeting of the biennium, absentee voting will not be permitted. And absentee voting is only allowed for members who have attended a substantial portion of the committee's discussion on the issue. So the idea from the subcommittee, from management council, is the chairman really get to decide what is the term a substantial portion of the committee's discussion.
And what was brought to us in the interim was that there were committee chairs that weren't consistent, you know, and I've heard that in the past. They'd let somebody and then they wouldn't let somebody. And we've even heard debates and issues with that over time. So we thought we'd just establish this. And this was, you know, this was just a judgment call of there was 3 options. I think LSO kind of provided the subcommittee. We adopted one of them and then brought it on to management council, and then it was brought here, so. Please,
Speaker?
Speaker Pro Tem.
So this last sentence on page M3, which states that absentee voting in joint interim committees shall only be allowed for members who have attended a substantial portion of the committee's discussion of the issue. Is that here to solve a problem? I mean, was it a problem that absentee votes on a bill were submitted, but then through discussion and amendment, the bill actually changed its purpose or focus so that the vote didn't necessarily reflect what the absent member intended to do? Is that the problem this is intended to address?
So Director, this was my 10 cents in my memory, and then you can go on. My memory was there were people in this discussion in the interim that just wanted to say no absentee. And so this kind of was like, because if you don't hear the debate, you shouldn't be able to vote on the bill. So there was that clan, let's say. And then there was others that thought differently, and so it was a compromise. I don't know if it was there for any other reason than a compromise, but Director?
I'd just say, Mr. Herman, if I could, and I've had this problem for 3 different committees now, where I've had members who can't make a meeting say, no, I want to be on record, and here are my votes on all of these bills. I've had members who were in airports who zoomed in and heard, part of the testimony and then had to fly. I've had people who were there for half a day and then left. They wanted to leave votes on bills that they hadn't heard, but they were at least at the meeting. And so it's been with one of my co-chairs, it's been a point of controversy of, we had a very different philosophical belief on what was allowed and what wasn't. Some co-chairs and I have we're on the same page and some aren't. So that's the real issue, is who is allowed to leave their vote. And we've had some leave their vote and before a major amendment would change the bill. You kind of know as a chairman, that person, ideologically would not want to vote for this based on what you know of them. So that's been the rub. But a lot of people want their constituents to know that they are for or against an issue.
Director, any thoughts, memories, what we did?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think that, I think the testimony in the subcommittee was that we don't want people casting ballots on issues that they haven't fully heard the discussion on. That's the whole reason for the committee process is an open and public discussion of the issue. And if they weren't there for a substantial portion of it, they shouldn't be allowed to leave an absentee ballot.
So, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, if you want to strike that, just make the motion.
Mr. Speaker, no, I'll leave the language as it is. I understand that it sounds like a lot of discussion went into this, and this language, although a bit fuzzy, strikes some kind of balance. I mean, I can see how a committee chair on a case-by-case basis might want to make the determination of whether they thought that someone had.
And when we go into
attended a
joint
substantial
rules,
portion.
any of us can make that motion as well, frankly. We're just trying to get a House position here. Chairman Olson?
Just want to just add to the conversation with Speaker Pro Tem, your comments that on a case-by-case basis, they may want to determine the use of the absentee. The last sentence isn't the one that gives me heartburn. It's actually the sentence immediately prior to that. If a chairman fails to announce the standard at the first meeting, then no absentees are ever allowed. I guess that's assuming that you have a chairman who's read the manual and knows that they have to make this announcement. I would almost feel more comfortable if that was a provision, if it was the opposite, if the provision simply said, unless a chairman says otherwise, absentees are permitted, because then that flexibility that you're talking about, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, is gone. If I messed up at that first meeting, if your chairman messed up, now the member is punished because a chairman didn't know the rules.
So would anybody like to make a motion on any of this? Chairman Swanitz.
I guess I have a question/request. And so the first meeting of the biennium with committees, I think 2 years ago with all of the Zoom and where we were, each chairman was said, you have to spend your first half an hour just setting the rules for the biennium when it comes to a lot of these issues. Is there a way to put that somewhere in the manual that at the first interim meeting of a joint committee, here are the ground rules to be discussed? I don't want a chairman to get caught and forget to talk about them, and a day later, they're in a So maybe somewhere we could put that in the manual, but I'm not sure where.
Director?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would say here, I think was the rationale for this, is that at your first regularly scheduled meeting of the biennium, you have to decide whether you're going to adopt rules that differ from the sample interim committee rules. And if you don't adopt different rules, if you fail to make that motion, you just have those sample interim committee rules as your committee rules. So I think that was the thought with this too, is that when you were considering those rules, the sample rules, you'd also decide on absentee voting at the same time.
So Director, this would end up in those sample rules then, if we adopt this?
No, Mr. Chairman, it won't end up in the sample rules, but it'll be another motion that each committee will know they need to make with those at that time with the sample rules. So the attorneys, and 2 years ago, this was a big issue because the joint rules changed on the interim committee rules. So we had to have every committee make sure they took some action on it, or we wouldn't know what the interim committee rules were. And so this will be an issue that the attorneys work with their chairman about, the sample committee rules and absentee voting.
So does anybody want to make a motion on this paragraph, any sentence? I'm fine, just whatever you want to do. Representative Craigo.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I want to make a motion, but may I ask a couple questions?
Sure, please.
And this might be directed at the director, but so what do we what happens in the circumstance when you have two chairmen, one from the other side and one from our side, and they can't decide which policy they're going to agree on? I mean, don't we have to have a fallback? And then that's at the beginning of the process, right? Your first interim meeting, according to this, we have to set forth a standard, okay. But then at each meeting on different days, we often have different chairmen. I mean, who's deciding what on which day? Do you refer to your chairman on the House side to make that decision? Does the House chairman get to decide for the House members and the Senate gets to decide for the Senate on whether they saw a substantial portion of the testimony? I mean, I think it just gets really, really muddy, and I guess, I don't know how to make it any better, Director, I'm sorry, but I guess my question to you is, what are your thoughts about that?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yen, you can jump in on this because this was discussed in the subcommittee, that very issue. What happens if the two chairmen don't come up with a standard? And I believe the interpretation out of the subcommittee was, then you don't have a standard if your two chairmen can't decide. And there was discussion on whether one House's chairman got to decide on the standard for that House and the other decide on the other. And I think it came out as, now, the way it was written, the chairmen together had to announce one standard, and if they failed to do so, there'd be no absentee voting. Now, how once that standard is adopted, how it's applied, of course, is probably a question for the committee then to determine.
Representative Yen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think from my understanding as well, we did this to establish a fallback position. This is the fallback position. If we want to change that fallback position to default to shall be allowed, I mean, that's up to us. We can do that. But the issue at hand was that there was so much ambiguity that it really led to unhappy committee members not knowing whether they were following the rules or not. So this way that there's one standard that we can fall back to. But yeah, if they don't disagree, if they don't agree, then we still have a fallback for if they don't agree.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I'm reading this, and I had the same concern that a couple of the chairmen here to my left had, was this says the word announce. It doesn't say agree, right? I mean, whether they announce it and whether they agree on a certain position are two different things. I mean, I understand they have to agree on it before they can announce it, but these guys were worried about the process, not the process of actually announcing it during the meeting so that everybody was on notice. But they may have actually agreed with their Senate counterpart about what the process was going to be. I mean, I think we can clean that up within the language fairly quickly. But I'm talking about something a little bit different. I think we have to probably check two boxes if we're going to make everybody happy.
Would somebody want to put in there, first of all, which direction do you guys want to go on?
I favor, you know,
Chairman Olson.
sorry, Mr. Chairman. I favor that whether it's announcing the standards or agreeing on the standards, I agree with Representative Craigo, that's confusing. Whatever it is, I think that the default should be that absentee voting is permitted unless the chairman agreed to a rule otherwise.
Is that a motion?
I'm not sure how to wordsmith that, but that's what I would favor.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, I'd make that a motion.
So if the chairman, and then is there like a cleanup that could be done? Like if the chairman failed to agree and announce the
Well, I mean,
stand?
you could. Yeah,
Okay, then
sorry, go ahead.
wordsmith it. Go ahead.
Were you Representative Zwanser?
I think, Mr. Chairman, where it says if the chairman failed to announce, if you amend that to unless the chairman agreed to different terms, jointly agreed to a different process or a different standard. LSO is going to help me out with that. A different standard, then the default is in place. But that would say if no agreement can be made, at least the default's into effect.
And the default is the absentee
that-
voting shall be permitted.
Correct.
Okay, let's just do a vote. Let's go with that amendment first. So would somebody make that motion that absentee voting shall be permitted? Okay, is there a second? Okay, seconded. Is there discussion?
Mr. Speaker, just so I understand the motion, if no one announces any rules, this motion passes, and no one announces any rules at the beginning, then the default is that I can completely skip a meeting and send all my votes in a week in advance. Is that what this motion would do?
That is correct. That is correct. Is there any other discussion on this amendment? Because the Senate is kind of waiting for us. Representative Jennings.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually kind of like that notion, except I personally wouldn't allow the chairman to have that prerogative. It's your vote. You answer to 10,000 people back home, and so I don't care if you lack integrity enough to try and be there. You get to answer for that. You weren't there. You didn't hear any of the discussion. You get to answer for that. I think that's probably better. The amendment's better than nothing.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my retort to that would be, well, then we can all be sitting at home right now and mail our votes in from wherever I live. I mean, we don't need to be here to hear the discussion or hear the good and the bad and the merits of the ideas. We'll just sort it out on our own and mail it in.
So
The second sentence.
if when they're here, we do have a rule on that. So Representative Oakley, and then I'll go to Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess for clarification, I think the motion just strikes out the word not. And then are we leaving then the last sentence in that says absentee voting in joint interim committees shall only be allowed for members who have attended a substantial portion of the committee's discussion? Or would, I guess,
Yeah, Representative Oakley, I think let's just decide what the base is. And the base is, we start out, in absence of an agreement, we start out at what? That you can vote or you can't vote. I think that was the motion.
I understand. I guess my question is, could that be read that those conflict if we take out the word not? I don't know.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Olson.
Since I made the motion, I will say that at least my intent in my motion was to keep the last sentence so that they would read together. So I think the example that Representative Craigo gave just wouldn't work. One, because we're in session and this only applies to interim, but two, because, I still think that you should, I'm not trying to change whether you have to attend a substantial portion of your meeting. I was just concerned with the sentence previous.
So your
Striking the word
motion,
not is really all you have to do.
yeah, so your motion is basically just to strike the word not. All right. That's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Representative Jennings, did you?
I was only going to retort back to the good country lawyer that this was only for interim committee meetings. It's not the rest of the time.
Please.
To avoid confusion, and I think this may be a friendly amendment. I think in addition to striking the word not, I think we may want to say in the sentence, the line above, if the chairman failed to announce a different standard at the first regularly scheduled meeting.
Representative Zwanitzer.
Right above that in 1, I think the good language is in the absence of adoption of alternative rules is how it's phrased in the first stanza, so maybe that's the correct language.
So read it like you would want to do it, Representative
In the
Zwanitzer.
absence of adoption of alternative rules, absentee voting shall be permitted. At the first regularly scheduled, yeah.
Sure, because the rules require
Rules
adoption
are
by the whole
rules.
committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is, I think is written right now at least, the chairman's discretion, and they announce whatever decision they make.
So what about if the chairman failed to agree and announce the standards at the first reg? Isn't that simple enough? We can wordsmith this forever.
And, you know, maybe the Senate would have something to say about this too, Mr. Chairman. So our meeting jointly after this.
Yep. So let's just highlight this. We agree that we're, just generally, do you agree, a committee, to strike the not? Okay, I'll raise your hand that would like to strike not from this as a base motion. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to 2. All right, so that's, when we go in with the Senate, circle this, Matt, and we'll, maybe perhaps you can wordsmith something and we can bring that if you have time or somebody else can. Let's quickly go through the rest if we can, because I think obviously the Senate, we're about there. So M4, anything on M4? Representative Oakley.
Mr. Speaker, I guess. Thank you. Really, really minor. I was just wondering if on page 1, we took out the word forms. So I'm on B, line 2.
Page what?
M4.
M4, okay, thank you.
So B, line 2, we had, on page 1, we had taken out the word forms. I just didn't know, because since it went from approval forms to approvals.
Director?
Of an old version you're looking at, because are you on, does the top of the page you're looking at say appendix N on it? Okay, it should read now, we got the pagination, right? It should read N1 at the bottom, but that's fine, I follow you. So what paragraph are you in, Representative Oakley?
N1.
I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Please go ahead.
Mr. Chair, so subsection B, it's the second line. It just has 15 co-sponsor approval forms, and I think we've taken out forms in the rest of this and just changed it to approvals, like on page 1.
Yep, I think that's good.
All right, so you got that note, Director?
Yep.
Does anybody object to just striking forms and conforming to other language? All right,
I do have.
go ahead.
Just a
Mr.
question.
Majority Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, I've had multiple legislators ask me, why the limitation on 15 co-sponsor requests? Is there anything that a person could do to make that large? Because I got folks who hate to hurt people's feelings by not asking. They're asking me, how come I can't sign on and be on the first sheet there? So
Right.
what was the reasoning behind that?
Director.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so this limitation has been in place for years, I think since 2000. Now, what it used to be is, we used to send out postcards for co-sponsor requests before everybody had the LMS extranet that they could do their claim over. When we developed the extranet and folks could submit or send and then also submit their co-sponsor approval forms over the extranet, we took the question to the Legislative Tech and Process Committee, should we expand that? There was testimony and discussion on each side. The decision was so that everyone wasn't waiting to keep, till they got 31 or 16 co-sponsors, waiting around to number their bill to do that. That we would limit this at 15. And then if people wanted more, they could wait until they were here, get a copy of the bill draft and write the names on it and submit
Chairman Swanitzer.
And then when Director Burke says postcards, you literally would get the entire bill, maybe 80 pages, and a postcard to send back in the mail. So you're sending out 15 $4, $5 packets of these bills, right? And so it's just a cost-saving measure. And then you wouldn't know, it would take a week or two to get them back, and it was just messy. And you wouldn't know if, and postcards would come back late after you turned it in. It was quite a process. And so the extranet has helped in that. But there was, in the tech process committee, there was certain discussion. You don't, in the old days, we maybe played more games where you'd co-sponsor a bill and then you decide you didn't like it or amend it. And then we had a lot of times people wanted their names off a bill. We have always held that, once your name's on it, it's on it. And so that was always a problem. You don't want to put too many. And then there was some belief you got more than a majority of the body. I can't remember what my good co-chairman said, but that was somehow inappropriate to have more than half your body co-sponsoring a bill that did something against something. I'm sorry, I'm not recalling, but there was some level when you get too many co-sponsors on a bill and it's more than the majority of the body, you're not actually having a debate or whatever. It's somewhere in Masons.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To me, it just seems kind of old-fashioned to not be able to request more co-sponsors. I love the SharePoint and all the features on it, and to have to print out the jacket and go around collecting signatures to me is more time-consuming. Just my thoughts.
Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we change it to 10 House and 10 Senate for co-sponsorship? Break it up that way?
So Director, there's no technological limitations. It's just
No,
more or
it's-
less a process whether we want to wait for people on the extranet. So
That's it.
obviously, I guess we could put down whatever we want here. So
I'll make a motion to change that to 10 House, no more than 10 House and no more than 10 Senate.
is there a second? First? It's been seconded. Now discussion. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the director. So I understand we're saying it's not limited by 15, but if we start doing House and Senate, there might need to be some technical changes, right, to how it's, because right now, of course, all of the names are there. So I'm just wondering if we're going to end up, just creating a technical change that may delay or something that may be difficult.
Mr. Chairman, it's a good question and obviously one I don't know the answer to. I do think we'll have to figure out something, write some code within the system to limit it to House or Senate, whether it's a big issue or not, I don't know. I just tend to think it's probably something we can do. It'll cost us a little bit of money, but it won't be a big issue.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, and then I'll go back to Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess when I look at that, at first blush, that is actually probably more restrictive than what we currently have because it's kind of limited. So I guess my suggestion would be on that is if we've got 93 members of the body now, if you had no more than 1/3 of the body, that could opine or sign on initially through the extranet, that would allow you what, 31? And then that's still 2/3 of the body is still you need to go and chase around or whatever, something like that would make, but it would certainly allow more room for people to be able to sign on and without certainly doing what some of the good representatives said, we're going to have over half of both bodies sign on, sticky, so you couldn't really do that either. So just a thought.
So I'll go around and take some comments on this, then if we want to redo a motion, that's fine. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. If we want to do a number, but I think we should just not create the mess of separating House and Senate. I don't know. If I were just to throw it out there, 25 to 30 would be about where I'd personally land, but I think we're kind of all on the same page, it sounds like.
Majority Whip Western, did you have?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm a little confused. I feel like we're being a little bit pedantic here because right now you can go and get as many as you want if they go and physically sign the bill anyway. I've seen bills floating around right now that have far more than this. So I think it kind of address, if you want to have more, if you want to have 93 co-sponsor, 92 co-sponsors, that's possible if they just go around and get physical signatures. So I think we already kind of have that measure in place right now.
Representative Stivar.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can already go on the extranet and just select all the senators to see what senators I sent my bill to. Then I can go back and select all the House and see which ones. So I don't see the problem on doing that, but with discussions here, maybe the number I've got is a little low. Bring that number up to, 15 and 15.
So we have a motion on the table. Would you like to withdraw that motion?
I will withdraw that motion.
Okay, would anybody like to make a second motion? Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would move that we would allow 31 jointly to be able to be done through the extranet, and then certainly go on and get other signatures if that person would so see fit.
Is there a second on that? Second on that?
I'll second.
Second all the way around. Any more discussion on that? Question, Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just don't understand what the hangup is about the 15 on the extranet. Like I said, you can go around and get more sponsors if you want. You just have to sign them on the jacket. And if this is going to take perhaps some reprogramming or something on the part of LSO to get this done, these rules will go into effect when we vote on them, correct? And we don't know whether or not they're going to be able to make those technical changes to the software. If there's still days for introduction of new bills remaining when we adopt these rules, and they can't adjust their software in that time frame, then I think we're just adding a complication that doesn't need to be made. So I'll be a no vote.
Yeah, I'll be a no vote as well. And basically the reason is, I think it will delay bills getting done, kind of cooked and baked and out. And you can always go get the signatures, but I think people are gonna hang on to these bills during session for a long time, waiting for more signatures instead of just walking them around. But Representative Crago?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just going to say, I see a big problem with allowing us to have more than half of any particular body. And that particular number does that because the original sponsor plus 31 co-sponsors gets us to 32. And if you had all House sponsors, you're over a majority. And my fear is it's just going to stifle good debate. Now, you can still go do it. You can get all the signatures, but I'm just afraid. I mean, once you're signed on, you're committed. And I'm just thinking practically, oftentimes you're not, once you've signed on, it's hard to change your mind and back away from that bill, even if there's a multitude of reasons that we find issues within the bill. And I personally, I'll be against the amendment and changing that number. If you really want to go do it, you can still do it. There isn't a rule preventing it, but I think maybe there should be, but there isn't.
Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman Zwanitzer.
Just some historical perspective. We talked about this a lot in facilities, right? The original purpose of co-sponsors on bills, because you look in the 70s and 80s, and it wasn't at all like it is now. It was really to make sure everybody knew who had the bill in the House and who had the bill in the Senate, who was the main sponsor. We had a lot of bills with two sponsors, and then people would kind of signal if they could get the speaker, the majority floor leader, the minority floor leader support, and that committee chairman. And it was kind of, you never really had for 80-90% of the bills more than 4 or 5 names, and it was you, and it was really people who were committed to helping you. So when those 3 people on the floor, you kind of knew the 3 people who were going to present the bill. And really in the past 4 or 6 years, it's this new phenomenon where we get there's probably 40 bills that have the same 15 people on them all, and it's getting kind of close to feeling weaponizing, in my opinion. Right? It used to just be 4 or 5 names, and so you knew exactly which 2 people in each body were going to handle that bill. And Congress does it, right? They put however many congressmen on a bill, so I understand why. But it used to be a procedural thing to help the body understand who they went and talked to, and who was a knowledgeable people on the bill. And now it's got, we just kind of put a group of 15 or 20, but they all seem to be the same 15 or 20 on a lot of them. And I'm not sure where this is going long-term. So I'm always for limiting the number of co-sponsors personally.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be an aye vote. I think the delay really lands when you get handed a physical bill, especially a large bill, and you're asked to, to read it and consider co-sponsoring it. And that delay for the sponsor is pretty lengthy because then I might take a little longer to read it, the paper version, might ask some questions, stick some Post-its on it, and then pass it on to the next person that's been asked to co-sponsor. That's a really long time. I like the electronic version. I appreciate when I get asked to be a co-sponsor of a bill. I can just read it online right there and check the box, and it gets electronically sent. I have a lot of faith in our IT department. Coding is inexpensive, and I don't see it any different than when you reset a password and they ask you, you need to put in a special symbol in there, or you can't put in a special symbol, etc. You'll get a little red alert that you've, clicked too many boxes. So I'll be an aye vote.
Question? Question having been called, all those in favor of the amendment to raise it to 31 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
So raise your hand. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed, raised your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the motion fails.
That was close.
All right, do we want to do another motion or move on?
I'll do it quick, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do it quick
I would
because we
say,
got to meet with the Senate.
I'd move that on a resolution, it can have an unlimited number of co-sponsors. I feel like resolutions, there are 3 or 4 this year that are in support of certain things. I feel, and they, I think, are supported by a large number of the body. That's nice. Where legislative bills, I'm not sure how to word that if I need to put a limit, but I think there should be a flexibility and allowability if they're resolutions, either to Congress as a statement or for the support of
Constitutional amendment?
a constitutional amendment as well. So in resolutions, anything that's a House joint resolution.
Is there a second? There's a second discussion. All those in favor signify. Representative Craigo.
Is that actually a change? Are we making a change with that language? I thought there is no limitation at this point on, it's just 15 within the extranet. It's unlimited outside of that, correct?
Right.
I'll withdraw it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yay. All right. MN5, I don't know, whatever number, we're into N2, only it's screwed up, right? So this should, well, no, I think we were on N1 because it was not numbered correctly. Now we're on N2. Any changes on N2? Any changes on the next page, which should be N3? I guess that in of itself is a change. But you probably had all that down. All right. Let's go on to the next page, which is O, and it's not numbered correctly either. O1, anything on O1? Next page, anything on O2? Next page, which is M9, what should be O3, no, P1. P1, anything on that? No, it's just a substitute bill process. Next page, P2. And then the final page would be P3, anything on that? And just to clarify Appendix Q, is this the order out of Masons, or is this the order that we just developed?
Now,
Our
Mr. Chairman, your procedural hierarchy here is your order as adopted by rules of the House and Senate.
Okay. Representative Western, losing my voice.
Mr. Chairman, my thought is, if we look at this order, you've got Constitution, rules, Wyoming manual, and then underneath that is custom and precedents. And I certainly appreciate the importance of custom and precedents, but I feel like there's a little bit of gray area in there. Well, you recalled it this way, well, I recalled it that way. That kind of, gray area. And so I personally believe that I think something like Mason's, where we all have a copy, we can all go get a copy and look it up, should probably be higher than customs and precedent. Would certainly be interested in discussion by the committee.
Okay, Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker. We heard some complaints early on when we were first talking about this proposed manual about state statute being so far down the list, and how do we exempt ourselves from state statutes. I'm just thinking that we ought to be more specific, either up there where we say procedural hierarchy, defined it as for legislative processes, something like that, or in statutory provisions defining legislative processes. So we're not running into the risk that somebody only sees this page and we say, the legislature says that, their precedents and their practices trump state statute. Just 2 cents worth.
Director, do you have any comments on what the statute piece means in this hierarchical order?
Mr. Chairman, I think it is exactly what Representative Washit said, that it means the procedures that are laid out in statute as they relate to the body.
So should we go statutory provisions related to procedures?
You certainly can. It doesn't mean that you can get away with murder on the floor.
That's
and
been
not be charged.
moved, so is there a second? It's been seconded for procedures. Yin, Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Section 4 in Mason's actually outlines the same precedents of rules of procedure.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, so it says the rules of legislative procedure are derived from several sources and take precedence in the order listed below: constitutional provisions and judicial decisions, adopted rules, custom usage precedents, statutory provisions, adopted parliamentary authority, and parliamentary law.
Chairman Olson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I had a question about that, and you may have just clarified it. Number 1, constitutional provisions and judicial decisions, or does it say judicial decisions thereon?
Representative Yin.
Thereon.
So maybe this is a question for you, Matt. I read that as judicial decisions on the constitutional provisions, not judicial decisions on statute. Where does that fit in? Because that's not on the list.
Director.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's right. It's constitutional provisions and judicial decisions thereon. I think you'd read any of the statutory requirement to also be judicial decisions thereon. That's not specified in Mason. It's also not specified in the rules.
We have a motion on the table just to make it statutory provisions for procedures. Any further comments, Representative Western? So this is a motion on having it statutory provisions for procedures. All those in favor, raise your hand. It passes. Any other issues with this hierarchy? Nope. Okay, we're back on the original motion. I guess having said that, with those amendments, would we recommend to the Senate to adopt this manual, and then we'll have it out with the joint? All those in favor of bringing these forward as the recommendations from the House, raise your hand. All those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, I think we're ready.
Not
Oh,
yet.
Oh,
You've
yeah,
got-
we have that joint rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, members of the Rules Committee, the Senate voted to repeal Joint Rule of the House and Senate 22-1 when they adopted their rules. You took no such action on that, on Joint Rule 22-1. I think the chairman wanted to at least discuss it today.
Yeah, I didn't bring it up then because we had too much going on. I felt and at that time, I really didn't know what they were doing. And they were looking like they might have, so basically 22-1 is the rule that deals with, with how you entertain a complaint. And so it's the process for a complaint. And so the Senate wants to repeal that, I think, and work on it. That's maybe not even work on it. But Director?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I mean, they did repeal it, so it's not effective as to the Senate, at least. I'm not sure how I'll end up advising you to interpret it for the House if it remains. I probably will advise that it still applies to the House. It was always a bifurcated process. It never really was a true joint rule in that it didn't deal with relations between the houses. It was clearly segregated between the House and the Senate and how they handled complaints. Between those, the same process.
So we can take up 22-1 if you want to, or we can just leave it lay and not deal with it. That's up to you. Representative Yen.
Mr. Chairman, I'm loath to remove the process without a replacement for the House specifically, so I would say that we deal with it at another time when we have a replacement process for the House.
I agree. I agree. We just leave it alone. Anybody else disagree? Chairman
Mr.
Swanson.
Chairman, it is my understanding that there is I'm not sure if I call it a subcommittee, but a group looking at further delineating what happens with ethics complaints and other complaints made to individual chambers of each house and how those house deals with them to be completed in 2023. So optimistically, by next session, there may be a new procedure that's developed on how to deal with ethics complaints. Is that correct?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it was the recommendation of the Management Council of the 66th Legislature to the Management Council of the 67th Legislature that they form a subcommittee to look into that. So that'll be something discussed in the March or April Management Council meeting.
Okay. Without any further ado, I guess we're